in my view, the way forward is pretty clear. A lot of it has to do with timing. There are things that need to be done in the short run, in the medium run, in the long run. But I'm not going to talk about it. I'm not going to talk about it because we're in the midst of a presidential campaign, and as you know, in the midst of this campaign, we will hear all sorts of highly realistic and productive and constructive proposals for dealing with these problems, so why should I do my thing? I'll just note that, unfortunately, whether in the short run, medium run, or long run, many of the measures, perhaps most of the measures, that I think a consensus of more or less objective analysts agree should be undertaken seem to be politically infeasible. I don't know, some of you may have heard yesterday morning, I think, on NPR, the Planet Money crew brought together about a half dozen economists, and they went from the left, Dean Baker on the left, to Luigi Zingales of Chicago on the right, and asked them about could they agree on some point. And they, almost everything. They had about a dozen policy proposals on which they agreed, which I could give you some examples, not one of which stood a snowball's chance in hell of ever getting through Congress and the President. Okay? So this is not a technical problem. These are not technical economic problems. These are political problems. Okay? I won't talk about that. I will if people ask me about it. But rather than go there, I want to ask a different question. Rather than ask what can be done to resolve this crisis, we can come back to that if we want. But what I want to do is ask really sort of a different question, going back to the source, which is, why did all this happen? Why did we find ourselves in the midst of really an unprecedented financial collapse? I almost want to say there has never been a crisis like this on a couple of dimensions. There has never been a global debt crisis. There have been regional debt crises like East Asia or Latin America. And it's not that there has never been a debt crisis with a developed country, but there has never been a debt crisis experienced by the world's leading financial center and the world's largest economy. Debt crises usually happen to relatively poor or middle-income countries like Brazil or Turkey, or Italy had one in the 70s. So there's never really been a crisis of this type. And I think no one in the 1960s would have thought it possible. So what happened? Actually, I'm going to open a parenthesis here just to say one thing. Which is to disagree with QE, not quantitative easing, but Queen Elizabeth. When I say that no one anticipated the crisis, it is true that no one anticipated the specific characteristics of the crisis we are now in. But Queen Elizabeth was misguided when she, as you may recall, about 9 months ago, she had a meeting with a bunch of British economists, and she said, "Why didn't you warn us about this?" Well, the fact is that between 2003 and 2007, virtually every meeting I went to about international monetary and financial affairs was focused on the grave problems that people identified with the term being used then was the global macroeconomic imbalances. That is, the very large scale borrowing by the US, the UK, and the peripheral European countries. And the question that was debated in all these forums was, will this lead to a hard landing or a soft landing? No one debated that there were going to be problems. It was just whether we were going to be able to come out of these global imbalances without there being a crash, or whether there was going to be a crash. So no one listened, right? No one listened. But policymakers certainly didn't listen. And it is, I think, it's not just a mistake, it is inaccurate to say that economists and other analysts did not foresee the kinds of problems that would arise. Now, it's true, they didn't foresee the scale, they didn't foresee the way in which the crisis would hit, they didn't foresee how it would be transmitted, that it would start in the subprime portion of the American mortgage market, and so on and so on, be transmitted through Bear Stearns and Lehman Brothers and AIG. But that's like blaming a doctor who says, listen, you're 150 pounds overweight, it's going to be bad for your health, and you might have a heart attack, and when you have a stroke, you blame him for not telling you might have had a stroke as well. So the analysts that identified very serious problems, policymakers didn't listen. So